We're actually looking at an example here. So this is a cast of a modern human skull. I've put a little Neanderthal here for you so you can sort of see the difference. This one, if I say was a producer for one of those television shows, and I know they do this, of course, I could do a lot with because, oh my God, all the aliens, right? Right? Well, not so much. This is a cast of a modern human skull of somebody from southern Peru approximately 1,600 years ago from the Paracas region, where, and this is not the only place in the world where cranial deformation has been practiced. And they start saying some people are more dangerous than others because they're in league with dark powers or fallen angels and so on, which leads to lots and lots of terrifying places when you start thinking about people talking about ethnic lineages and conspiracies. I mean, this has a long history in anti-Semitism and other kinds of conspiracy theory. And all of a sudden, it's not really like, oh, that funny guy on TV. It starts to get really, really serious by pretending you're using scientific knowledge and methods when in reality you're not. Or this idea that, oh, there must have been ancient civilizations on Earth that had contact with ascended masters with wisdom. This is starting to sound somewhat familiar to something, by the way, about half of Americans believe. You might not want to believe that, but Chapman University recently put out a study. This has been growing. This has been growing in the last few years. Over 40% of Americans now believe in what you might call ancient aliens. Over 50% believe in something like Atlantis. And these numbers have grown. And I think it's no accident that we're seeing conspiracy theory increasingly in our public and political discourse at that same time. But they're all kind of coalesced actually by, to some degree, one guy, pioneering science fiction and horror writer H.P. Lovecraft, who in the early 20th century wrote a series of super influential tales called the Cthulhu Mythos that are basically about the notion of ancient aliens. You know, horrible, monstrous beings that have come from the stars and are now hidden in ruins on Antarctica, which is a thing people believe, or hidden in continents below the sea, and that there's a worldwide cult. He gets that from archaeologist Margaret Murray that worships these things. And when they find out that you know about it, well, they're going to come for you. Now, here's the thing. I've been able to figure out, at least to some degree, where this comes from. And a lot of it comes from archaeology and how archaeology was seen in the public when he was writing these stories. And it's when he writes and sets this story that more or less invents the whole ancient aliens thing. Now, it was fiction. He was writing it for weird tales and other kinds of pulp fiction, kind of the equivalent of sort of, you know, trash TV today, which occasionally has a gem in the rough, and that's what this stuff was. But as soon as he was dead in 1937, he had people writing even before this, but he would deny it. People were like, oh, this is all real. All these ancient gods and evil books and, you know, sorceries are all real. It's all hidden in ancient pyramids around the world. And by the 1940s, many of these ideas were inspiring the people that would write the first folklore and mythology about what becomes flying saucers and UFOs.
I was working with Dr. Card in the special projects internship, and I was doodling, and he was like, oh, you're really good at art, so draw some maps for this. I was like, okay. And then later on, he came up and was like, hey, I have some graphs that look really boring, and would you like to illustrate them? And I was like, yes. So that's how that happened. And so each one is based off of the theme of the graph. So this one is the Cthulhu Index. It's the overall end, so technically it should not be it, but it's fine. It's a compilation of the previous two graphs. And it's called the Cthulhu Index because it shows where Lovecraft writes the Cthulhu short story, and it's the reason that it is the tentacles is because Cthulhu is very well known for having tentacles, and the books all around the side are some of the titles are actually connected to the Cthulhu Mythos, but that Lovecraft himself as well as his friends wrote and or mentioned within the stories. And then this second one is the sunken continents in the New York Times. And so I drew it to make it look like it was underwater. And I have like this Atlantis-like thing going on in the background where there's like pyramids and then like pillars and all that. and I'm really proud with how the pillars came out. And yeah, so that's that. And for the dead archaeologists, we were debating as to whether or not the bars should be like skulls or not, but then we decided to do the mummies instead because it was already a bit morbid. And as we were going to do the mummies, then may as well make the entire thing Egyptian themed. And so this mummy, Sarcophagus, is based on the unlucky mummy, which is the one that is blamed for the sinking of the Titanic. I wasn't able to get both hands in, but you can kind of see one of the hands, and it's very well known for that feature. And so the mummy's coming out of that one, and then this one is based on King Tut's sarcophagus, and he's just kind of looking over like, what even is going on? So that's kind of what was going on with that. As for like how I drew them by hand, because I'm not very well versed on how to draw them in Photoshop or Adobe Illustrator yet. But then after I drew them by hand, I manipulated them into using Photoshop and whatnot. So.
How long was the process? How long?
It took about half, maybe a little bit more than half of the spring semester. So.